Tian reporting from Johannesburg, South Africa. This week, from the South African capital, I will bring you special coverage of the 15th BRICS Summit and Chinese President's state visit to the country. The BRICS Summit 2023 is believed to be a grand occasion for the Global South. The decade-old BRICS Business Council has developed into a platform for tremendous synergy among BRICS economies. This year, a 4-day grand trade fair along the BRICS Summit is being held, showcasing products and services from the Global South. Busi Mabuza, as chair of the BRICS Business Council from the host country this year, works hard behind the scene. She believes new energy, new technology are the greatest potential of cooperation. As the African continent is meeting leaders of the BRICS economies, there is great potential for cooperation in the global supply chains. Let's take a look at this interview. Busi, what a pleasure to see you once again.
Well, it's such a delight, and thank you so much for coming to South Africa.
And I see you work the crowd in the trade fair, talking to all your business partners. Wow.
It is such a delight way. So at the trade fair, you did see that we have not just South African business represented, but we have businesses from all the other BRIC countries, which is so exciting. And this time around, of course, South Africa decided to invite businesses from the rest of the continent, which has brought in a very rich flavor, because these are people who actually are very keen to trade with the BRICS nations.
Absolutely, but it means a lot of workload for you. All the continents are coming, right?
It is work, but the opportunity, I think, is such that we actually cannot miss it. So it was very important. Partially, the demand was actually making us, we were responding to the demand, because when we spoke to business leaders, I traveled, I had a roadshow into the continent just to inform people about what the BRICS Business Council is about, and that we were going to be hosting our BRIC counterparts at this point in time. And they all indicated an interest to come. And I also had the pleasure about 4 weeks ago to be in Beijing to talk to the business community there and indicate to them what preparations we had made for their visit to South Africa. So I'm so pleased that the response has been so positive.
I saw many of them here, you know, from telecommunication companies to banking sector to the oil and energy, and the list goes on.
The list goes on, and of course China is a very big supplier in the country to the energy sector. As you know, we have a supply deficit at the moment, not just in the country, but in the continent. South Africa feels the supply deficit more because we've come from a period where we used to have more supply than we had demand. So we feel the unscheduled, now they are much more scheduled, blackouts, which we call load shedding.
Right.
And the intervention on the renewable energy side, China has played an absolutely critical role. The legacy fuels are also very important because they are running our logistics, they are running the base load of the economy. So I'm absolutely delighted that those companies are here as well. Of course, the other technology entities, very important, because we have a youthful population in the country and in the continent. And China has moved up the technology curve, I believe, actually overtaking some of the other countries that we used to believe were leading in technology development. And we are very grateful that we've been able to convince our Chinese counterparts to share knowledge, share technology, and enable us to make our economy even more productive, make sure that the young people also get jobs.
Right. It's a very comprehensive report that you are giving to us, very much insightful. Let's talk about some of these sectors specifically. On the renewable energy, I understand China and South Africa, for example, just among many business partners here in the African continent, has signed contracts and have been working together on that front very vigorously. So what does that mean for your business council in terms of correlating policies with the government, in terms of soliciting more support for that sector?
So South Africa actually opened up the renewable energy opportunity through what was called the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program in 2013, so 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And we saw a lot of interest from all over globally, and those power plants are now up and running. However, some of the older technology, of course, didn't have the storage capacity, which is absolutely necessary. And China has now developed battery storage that is also moving up the curve. And I expect that we'll now be able to store even more and more energy, which is going to help South Africa address its problems. So the memoranda that have been signed are actually intended to help South Africa in addressing, in the immediate term, the energy supply issues, but also to transition to the cleaner energies, which the world is demanding of all of us to do. And I'm pleased that we can do that in partnership with BRIC counterparts, especially China.
And this is going to be a mutually beneficial, certainly,
relationship. Without a doubt. Our minister did say, you may have caught him this morning, talking about the investment opportunity for Chinese business in the country, because some of the raw materials that we export actually go into these battery storage components, and we look forward to the companies coming into the country and producing some of those components, assembling the batteries here in the country, because that will be mutually beneficial.
The other thing is about employment. You mentioned earlier in your analysis, here in South Africa, in other parts of Africa, in other parts of developing emerging economies, and also in the developed economies, youth employment is a big issue.
Correct.
So how can we prepare today so that we can better solve the problem tomorrow? That is going to take systematic work. So how do you see from the Business Council perspective?
Especially if we were to solve the problem sustainably.
Absolutely.
So our Stats SA, which is the government agency responsible for keeping and announcing our statistics in the country, announced the labor force outcomes just a few weeks ago, if not a few days ago, and our rate of unemployment remains stubbornly high. So they were pleased that there was no uptick, but the change was marginal, with the private sector, at least holding the employment numbers together. Now, to address this problem sustainably, and let me just indicate, in South Africa, the unemployment issue affects the youth even more. Some economists estimate that youth unemployment is in the region of close to 50%. Now, that is absolutely unacceptable, to see half of the employable, strong, vibrant, eager workforce sitting at home because there are no job opportunities available. To address this sustainably, of course, we need to probably, as a country, pivot away from what used to be traditionally considered as the traditional job creation sectors.
I see.
We need to encourage young people to be job creators themselves. So entrepreneurship is a very important area of intervention. Skills development, a very important area of intervention. Indicating opportunities in the digital economy, because I believe that those kinds of jobs lend themselves to entrepreneurial ventures is absolutely important. And we have found that our South African Skills Development Working Group members have been able to cooperate very, very closely with all BRIC counterparts. But I would not be wrong if I indicated to you that our counterparts from China have been particularly enthusiastic in assisting us with knowledge transfer, input into our curricular development, training opportunities for skills of the future. And I'm delighted that that is happening. In fact, our Skills Development Working Group will be having a session here at Gallagher Convention Center now. But next month, we are hosting what is called BRICS Skills Challenge, where young people will be coming back to South Africa and at another venue participating in this Skills Challenge, where they'll be adjudicating the most promising innovations that talk to skills of the future.
Another issue which I'm also very eager to invite your opinion is about global supply chains. We have seen the disruption of it has been exacerbated by both the pandemic past 3 years as well as the ever-increasing evolving landscape of geopolitics. So how do you, from South Africa and also from the African continent, look at the roles that you can play and also be able to collectively address this issue to the extent that we can?
So the impact way of the shocks that we saw in the supply chains, I believe were probably felt more on this continent than anywhere else. If you recall, during the pandemic, the African continent could hardly get access to personal protective equipment, which was much needed for the frontline staff. We, as the South African chapter of the BRICS Business Council, had to pick up a phone, call our counterparts in China, and say, could you assist? And thankfully, they did actually assist and ensure that we got the PPE that we required. We had to call and ask our counterparts for much needed medication. Africa was last in the queue in terms of vaccine availability, with, of course, our friends such as China being amongst the first to make vaccines available to people on the continent.
In light of all of these challenges that we are all facing today, many are looking at what is going to be the role of the BRICS. For you, of course, from a business perspective, there are a lot of talk about the expansion of the BRICS, whether it's BRICS Plus or in other different formats. So after working for BRICS for 10 years, this year celebrating the BRICS Business Council for 10 years.
Absolutely.
How do you see the role of BRICS at this point? What about the expansion ideas that a lot have been discussing?
So the 10 years has given us way is an opportunity to build very deep relationships, people-to-people relationships. Of course, we as business are building those relationships in the interest of the economic opportunity that the BRICS platform presents to us. Number of companies that are South African born and bred now have high growth businesses in other countries in BRICS. We have even more companies from the BRICS countries that have now come and set up shop here in South Africa and of course in the continent, and are doing so, I'd like to believe, very profitably, and also understand the opportunity going forward. So the expansion, I think, is actually recognition by the rest of the world, especially the global south, of, first of all, how we've conducted ourselves in the relationship, that the BRICS relationships are based on mutual respect and inclusive interest, mutually beneficial interest, and they are therefore coming and saying, we want to be part of this. So China may not be growing at the rates that it was growing at pre-COVID, but I'll take a 4-5% growth rate anytime for our economy. And for the size of the economy that we have in China, we would rather be at the table. And I believe that's why other countries are saying, we see the opportunity here. We want to be in engagements with yourselves, and we want to be part of this global future, this new future of the world. New in many ways. The majority of the, well, over 40% of the world population is in the BRICS nations.
Absolutely.
If you add the 1.3, 1.4 billion people that are in the African continent, it's the majority of the world population. Young population, the majority of youth in the world by 2030 are probably going to be in this formation.
The other thing about currency, there's a lot of talk about the de-dollarization. If you look at the international market of ideas over the past few months, especially with the Federal Reserve's decisions going back and forth. But the BRICS economies are eager to use more the local currencies that they have. According to the New Development Bank, for example, by the year 2030, likely to be more than 30% going to be in the local currency.
Absolutely.
So from a business perspective, how feasible is this? Is this an urgent task from the business perspective?
So we have engaged as the South African chapter with our South African Central Bank, South African Reserve Bank.
Indeed.
And in fact, our Reserve Bank governor made comments just a month ago, a few weeks ago, on this matter, indicating that one needs macroeconomic convergence in order to talk about, to even think about a common currency. The euro is a relatively recent example, most certainly an example of my lifetime, that has had its own challenges.
Yes.
The signal that we have seen from our countries is that they have already started trading with each other in own currency, and this seems feasible going forward. The New Development Bank that you've indicated announced just recently that they have now for the first time raised funding in South African rands.
Indeed.
So we now can approach the New Development Bank.
And it's doing very well in the international market, by the way.
Absolutely, absolutely. We can now approach for rand-denominated funding, which is fantastic for us. So I believe that as the conversation goes on in the background, we in the meantime will continue trading and test the opportunity of trading in own currency with the trade, the rate of trade seemingly increasing at the rate that we expect. I mean, a chief economist was telling us a few days ago,
Chief Economist
of the Industrial Development Corporation, an organization that I am
yes.
that I'm very close to, indicated to us that over the past 10 years, trade within the BRICS, amongst the BRICS partners, has grown at a rate of over 7% per annum, compound growth rate. I expect that this will either hold or even improve. And if we're then able to conduct that trade in each other's currency, I believe that then we'll start finding a solution as the conversations about a common currency take place amongst the relevant monetary authorities.
Busi, what a pleasure. I know you have to run around, but so wonderful to see you.
Thank you so much, Wei, and I look forward to seeing you
very
Perhaps
soon.
in China soon.
Okay, looking forward. Keep up the great work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.